Hi, I'm James Catherall, founder of Catherall Audio, and today I'm going to talk about what I believe is one of the best features inside of MainStage, and that's the MIDI effects. So if you've ever worked in audio, you're probably familiar with what's known as audio effects, and that's things like reverbs and compressors and EQs and all that type of stuff that's going to manipulate and affect your audio after it comes out of an instrument or after it's been played. But here we have what are known as MIDI effects, and that's going to alter the MIDI data before it gets to your virtual instruments inside of MainStage. So let's look inside of our MainStage concert to check it out. So we go over to our channel strip, and up above our virtual instrument where it says input, you'll see it says MIDI effects. And we can click this area and see our drop-down menu of all the MIDI effects. All right, I'm gonna go down the list and check out all of these. Some of them have a lot more depth to them, so you'll probably wanna pull these up in your own MainStage concert to play around with them and figure out exactly what they can do for you. Starting with the first one, we have the Arpeggiator. This is MainStage's built-in Arpeggiator, and it's actually super powerful. It's got some of the more standard features right here. This is the rate of the Arpeggiator. You can pull it up and down to make it slower or faster. You can have the order of notes that you play, so it'll go up the notes or down the notes. It has some variation, so it'll play it maybe a little bit out of order depending on how high you have this slider. And then the octave range, so it'll play multiple octaves outside of what you just pressed. And then down here is the pattern. You can have it do it live, so it'll trigger the chords that you play yourself with the MIDI controller, or you can draw in your own grid. We have options here to do all kinds of different things, randomizing note lengths, randomizing velocities, you can do swing, all kinds of things like that. You go over here to the keyboard, and you can do what's called a keyboard split, which is actually pretty cool. So you have the area where you play the arpeggio, and then down here at the bottom, this blue window is the remote, which basically acts like a key switch like you'd have in a virtual instrument. If I click right here, this will show me when I press these keys, it's going to do these functions for the arpeggiator. And then finally we have the controller, which is just going to change different MIDI messages. So like sustain is going to do latch, and then you have 3 other windows to create some other stuff with your MIDI controller. So that one's super in-depth, and it's a pretty awesome arpeggiator. If you do that a lot when you're playing live music, I would definitely suggest you check out the MainStage arpeggiator a little bit more in depth. All right, let's go on to our next one. I'm gonna go back to this drop-down menu. I'm gonna do the chord trigger. So I think the chord trigger is actually one of the best MIDI effects inside of MainStage, and it's the one that I definitely use the most often by a lot. It allows me to take an input from my MIDI controller that I press, and I can tell MainStage to output it as something completely different. So looking here inside of the window, I have my input, which is my actual physical MIDI controller that I'm gonna be pressing with my hands. And then here's the output, and that's what's going to be outputted into my virtual instrument. Chord Trigger has 2 different modes. There's single and there's multi-mode. So single mode is going to take a chord and it's going to transpose it up and down the keyboard, but it's just going to be one single chord. So this would be what would often be referred to as planing, which means I'm going to be playing a certain chord, and then when I move it up, it's going to keep the exact same interval relationship between each of the notes. So let's check out how that works. I'm going to start by pressing the Learn button. And then I'm going to press C3, and then down here I'm going to press C, E, G, and create a major chord. And then I'm going to press the Learn button again. So now I can press C, and that'll be my C major chord. And if I go up to C sharp, it's going to transpose everything up a half step. And then I can go to D, and it's going to keep that exact same major chord. So single mode actually has 2 pretty good functions that I use a lot. First one is being able to stack octaves for a virtual instrument while only having one instance loaded. So instead of having to add a bunch of layers that adds a lot of CPU usage, I can just stick with one layer and use the chord trigger to trigger multiple octaves at the same time. To start, I'm going to clear, and then I'm going to press Learn, and let's press C, and then down here I'm going to have that same C, and then add an octave above, and we'll go one more octave above and an octave below. And then I'm going to turn off Learn, and now I can press notes. So now it's triggering multiple octaves at the same time, even though I only have one instance of the instrument loaded. Another function is using it to transpose your keyboard. So now typically transpose functions will go up 1 or 2 octaves and down 1 or 2 octaves. But now this allows me to transpose the full range of the keyboard. So let's check that out. I'm going to clear again, and now let's click Learn. I'm going to start here at the top of the keyboard with C5, and I'm going to transpose it all the way down to C1. So that's pulling it down 4 octaves. I can unlearn, so now when I play the top of the keyboard, it's going to trigger the notes all the way down at the bottom. So that's it, taking a single chord and transposing it across my keyboard. Now let's check out the multi mode. Now when I go to multi, I can see a few different areas in the input. Some of the keys are orange, and some of the keys are blue, and some of them have white dots on them. So the orange keys are going to bypass the chord trigger entirely, and it's just going to play the virtual instrument normally. Anything inside of the blue window is where I'm setting up as basically my trigger window. If it's a blue note without a white dot, that's going to actually output nothing because I haven't told the chord trigger what I want it to output when I press that note. If it does have a white dot on it, that means that I've set up a specific chord that's going to be triggered when I play that note. So we can take a look here in our window, and we can see if I press C3, you can see it's just going to play my virtual instrument normally. If I go down to C2, I press those and they don't make any sound because they don't have white dots on them. If I click these notes with white dots, that's going to play a chord, and that's going to play a chord. So let's input our own chords. I'm going to go up here where it says clear, and I can hold Option and clear all of those white dots. Then I'm going to go to Learn. I'm going to press C3, and we can create that C major chord again. Then I turn off Learn. Every time I press that, that gives me my major chord. The other thing to keep in mind is when I press a note, the output doesn't need to be related to that note in any way. So let's check that out now. I'm going to click Learn, and now I'm going to click D. And so now I'm going to be pressing D3 to trigger this chord, but instead, let's make it an A minor chord all the way down here at the bottom of the keyboard. I can turn that off. So now when I press C, there's my C major chord, and then I'm going to press D, and it's going to trigger an A minor chord all the way down at the bottom of the keyboard. So multi-mode can be super useful because now I can have a whole bunch of different chords being triggered based off of what notes I set up. I can have it trigger a whole bunch of different things with my left hand, while on my right hand it's bypassing the chord trigger and I can just play melodies with my right hand on top. So now if I just have one keyboard player, I'm not limited in what they can play. So that's the chord trigger, and that's what I believe to be one of the most powerful MIDI effects inside of MainStage, because it allows me to completely transform what notes are being triggered based off of what I'm playing on my keyboard. Now let's go on to our next one. Back to the drop-down menu, and I'm going to go to the Modifier. So the Modifier allows you to take input events from your MIDI controller and change them to a different event that's going to go to your virtual instrument. So let's see what that means. I can go to Input Event and change this to Mod Wheel, and then reassign to, let's say, Expression. So now if I move the mod wheel on my MIDI controller, it's going to affect the expression inside of my virtual instrument. And something to keep in mind here that we haven't really talked about yet is that a MIDI effects only affects the channel strip that it's placed on, just like in audio effects. It's not going to go global to your entire patch, it's only going to affect that one virtual instrument. So another cool thing that we can do here, I'm going to open up the sampler window, pull that to this side, pull this over here, and now when I go reassign to, I can click this drop-down menu, and at the very top, it has Learn Plugin Parameter. So now I can click this, and then I'm just going to click one of the knobs inside of the sampler instrument, and we can see now that it's going to reassign, and it's going to go to Filter 1 Cutoff inside of the sampler. So if I move my mod wheel up and down, you can see it's moving that cutoff knob inside of the sampler. So now that allows me to affect a wide range of things that's specific to each of my virtual instruments. And below that we have our scale and add. So this can scale up or down the input MIDI information, or it can add or subtract from that input MIDI value. So keeping in mind that a MIDI effects only affects the channel strip that it's placed on, I can put that on multiple different channel strips inside of a patch and have them all affecting different things. So using my one mod wheel, I can have a big effect on all of my different virtual instruments. So that's really useful if you only have one mod wheel and you don't have a bunch of faders on your MIDI controller. You're not limited to how many things you can affect. Now, going on from there, I'm going to add this next MIDI effects on this strings patch. This one's called the Modulator. So this one can look pretty intimidating at first glance, but really all we have is an LFO and an envelope that's affecting the MIDI data. So let's start by going down here where it says mod wheel. I'm going to change this to pitch bend just to make it a little bit more obvious what we're doing. So now if I press a note, you can see that it's changing the pitch of this strings patch. And we have a bunch of different LFO shapes. We can do sine waves, we can do random. I can click here and I can change the rate. Pull that down. And now let's see what the envelope does. If I click right here and then go envelope to LFO rate, I can pull that up. And now based off of this envelope shape, it's going to change this rate of the LFO. If we listen to that. And you can see as that went up and down, it made the LFO rate speed up and slow down. So that was just one specific use case to make it obvious what was happening with that MIDI effects plugin. But you can use that on a bunch of different MIDI information to be able to change it using the LFO and the envelope. So let's check out our next ones. These ones are going to be pretty straightforward. Starting with the note repeater. All this is going to do is take the note I press and repeat it a certain amount of times based off of what this number says. So if I push a note, right now it's going to repeat it 3 times after the initial press. So now I pressed it once and then it repeats it 3 more times. And you can change the speed of that right here with this slider. You can change how many times it gets repeated by pulling this up and down. You can have it transpose the notes as it repeats them. So if I have it transpose up 3 steps every time. And then you can have a velocity ramp, so it's either making the notes louder or softer as it repeats them. So that's a pretty specific one that doesn't have a wide range of uses, but it's another tool in your toolbox that you can go to if you need it. Next one is the randomizer. So now this is going to take input events, and you have the input range where it's going to listen to it, and then you can have an output offset, and then you can also change how much of the weight is being randomized in either a higher range or a lower range. So this one can be pretty useful to randomize maybe certain events to make an instrument be a little bit more human. Is maybe you can give it slight variances to the pitch or slight variances to the velocity just to make it a little bit more human and a little bit less sterile of a virtual instrument. All right, now let's check out our next MIDI effects. Back in the drop-down menu, we're going to go to the Scripter plugin. The Scripter plugin is one of the most in-depth MIDI effects that MainStage provides, and it has the deepest rabbit hole that you can dive into. This allows you to script your own plugins inside of MainStage that you need to be able to code through JavaScript. So if you look here inside of the script editor, here's your lines of code, and this is where you can add more lines of code to it. You can go up here to this drop-down menu. And I can see where it says factory. These are some of the default presets that you can use in the Scripter plugin. It also has tutorial scripts that can help teach you the syntax and how to code your own plugins if you want to. You can learn a little bit more about this plugin if you go to the MainStage user guide. It has a whole section that teaches you a little bit more about the JavaScript and the coding. There have been some awesome creators in this space that have made some great Scripter plugins, and we've made some videos about those on our channel already if you want to check those out up here. So it's really about how deep you want to go in that rabbit hole and how comfortable you are with coding in JavaScript. And with that, let's go on to our next one. Drop down menu, we're going to go down to the Transposer. So this is your more straightforward transposing plugin. You can use this slider to transpose up 2 octaves or transpose down 2 octaves. Other thing that's pretty cool about this one is down here, this almost acts like a pitch correction plugin. You can turn off certain notes so they won't be played. If I press that note, it's going to transpose it down a half step. So if I press D sharp and then I press E, it's just going to output a D sharp again. You do the same thing if I push F sharp and then I push G, it's going to transpose it down to that F sharp. So I actually don't really use the Transposer plugin that much. My go-to is actually the Chord Trigger, just because the Transposer maxes out at 2 octaves in either direction, and the Chord Trigger allows me to transpose the full range of the keyboard if I want to. Now let's go to last but not least, our velocity processor. This is another great MIDI effects plugin inside of MainStage, and I use this one quite a bit because it allows you to change the velocity inputs from your keyboard before they get to the virtual instrument. So this has a few different modes. To start off, we have the compressor mode. This has your standard compressor knobs. We have our threshold where it's going to start to compress, and then you have your ratio of how much it's going to compress it, and then you have your makeup so that you can make it up after it's compressed. So this can be really useful if there's certain velocity ranges on a virtual instrument that you don't like. That maybe that very high end of it is a little too harsh and a little too bright. You can use the compressor so that if you start pressing a little too hard, it's still going to stay out of the way of that bright part of the virtual instrument. Next, I can go to the value and range. So now I have this value slider, and this is going to take whatever MIDI input you give it, and it's going to output this exact number that you slide it to. So I can slide it to the max or make it all the way down to the minimum. So no matter what, it's only going to output that one value. You can also change it to range. So now instead of just one value, it's going to only output a range of values. So anything below 49 is going to get pushed up, and anything above 90 is going to get pushed down. So similar to a compressor, you can use this to limit the outside ranges of a virtual instrument that you might not like. And then the final one is the add/scale that we've seen before. You can use this to scale that MIDI velocity up or down, or to just straight add or subtract from the inputted MIDI velocity. And those are the MIDI effects inside of MainStage. So once again, I really feel like that's one of the most powerful parts of MainStage that makes it so great, is you don't have just your standard audio effects that affect the audio after it's been played. You can actually affect the MIDI before it's even getting to your virtual instruments, especially using things like the Chord Trigger and the velocity processor. Those are by far my most used MIDI effects that typically end up in basically all of my concerts. And there's some of those other MIDI effects that I don't personally use as much, but they still have a lot of depth to them and they're really powerful. So you can try adding those to your concerts and see what you can get out of them. So that's it for this video. If you found it helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and to make sure that you subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one.